We will now turn to the clerk candidates. The clerk elected at the annual meeting will rise to be the speaker for the 2022-2023 year. And we'll start with introductions for each candidate. We will first turn to Mr. Rich Rivera of Jacksonville, Florida.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're hailing from. And I think I saw Fabi on, so good evening to you in Germany. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to sit on the candidates forum and learn about the candidates that are running for office. And thank you especially to those of you who are still here and have lasted this long through the forum. My name is Richard Rivera. I am a partner at a mid-sized law firm in the Jacksonville, Florida office. I first got involved in leadership 5 years ago with the Young Lawyers Division. And my time in leadership here has been spent in large part trying to advocate and better the plight of young lawyers, both within and without the division. Specifically, I came in as the chair of the litigation committee. And during that time, serving there for 2 years, we put on a skills-based program for going through the various stages of litigation as a way of teaching young lawyers who maybe didn't know what to do in their new practice and maybe were afraid to ask because unfortunately most law schools don't actually teach you how to practice law other than giving you legal theories and doctrines. And so it was a way of providing that content to people so that they were able to learn from that and better their careers and by that, by byproduct of that, better their lives. I've also served as Vice Director and Director of Practice Services and have continued in trying to do that and provide those skills-based teachings for young lawyers. As speaker, I wish to continue that and advocate both for the members of the Young Lawyers Division as well as young lawyers everywhere. I've advocated as a member, well, I currently serve as a member of the resolutions team, but prior to that, I brought and successfully argued a resolution for the Assembly to increase the speaking roles for young attorneys in practice. And so my platform is really based on 3 pillars. It's transparency, relevancy, and inclusion. I expect that I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that during the questions that will follow, as well as my conclusion. And I look forward to getting to speak with you and to you over the rest of the day and in the coming months.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. We will turn next to Shasta Inman of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Ms. Inman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hello, everyone. My name is Shasta Inman, pronouns she, her. I am thrilled to be here at the second Candidates Forum for ABA YLD contested elections to discuss my campaign for clerk. If you tuned in for the first forum, welcome back. If you missed the first one, be sure to check it out on the YLD elections webpage. For those of you who are watching live today, Mr. Speaker did pop that URL into the chat. But if you are watching the recording, you can most easily find the YLD elections webpage if you just Google ABA YLD elections. It should pop up for you. The clerk section from that first forum is about 20 minutes long, and it begins at timestamp 2120, so you can find us pretty easily. You can also find brief written candidate statements on the elections webpage, which I encourage you all to check out. And I'm going to try really hard not to be too repetitive. About the position of YLD clerk. In addition to succeeding to the office of YLD speaker after 1 year, the clerk oversees delegate credentialing for the YLD assemblies, which includes outreach, contacting affiliates, and maintaining connections so our members always have their fingers on the pulse of the YLD. Number 2, education. Keeping your finger on the pulse only helps if you understand what that heartbeat means. So as clerk, I will continue the education efforts of recent officers to ensure members and affiliate leaders understand what Assembly is, what it does, how it works, and how individuals can serve as delegates. Which brings me to number 3 for the clerk, registration and certification of delegates, which then brings back in the outreach, recruitment, and education parts of those possible delegates, plus the logistics of meeting registration and Assembly certification. For all of these inner workings as clerk and the job of speaker, which is the chief legislative and policy officer and also holds these wonderful candidate forums, I have 3 main interrelated goals: promoting participation, demystifying the process, and implementing ABA Goal 3 for diversity, equity, and inclusion. To those ends, I will highlight policymaking as an ABA member benefit, cultivate a culture of confidence, because the more our members know and understand, the more they will feel comfortable stepping forward and speaking up during policymaking decisions. Utilize technology to increase access and promote participation for all members, and collaborate with ABA staff to make sure all of my ideas are actually feasible. Those are just some of the many ideas that I have for clerk, and I look forward to discussing them with you more.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. We'll start with you, Ms. Inman, for the first question, which is that over the last couple of years, the YLD has brought forward a number of policies to the House of Delegates, things on anti-discrimination via the Crown Act, paid parental leave, student debt matters, and more. While the Speaker and the Assembly are a democratic process and anyone can bring forward ideas, is there an area that you believe the YLD has not brought policy in where you would like to steer the division in the Assembly if you're elected?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a really tough one. I think that everyone in a leadership position, we bring into these positions our own experiences and our own lifestyles and what we really see. I would not have the tone or the finger on the pulse of someone who is in government practice and what the needs of a young lawyer in government practice is, because I'm a solo attorney doing child welfare law. Similarly, I don't have the pulse of what someone in public defender, district attorney, or civil litigation, those sorts of things. I'm also not a parent. So while I might have the pulse of the needs of a woman, solo attorney, LGBTQ disabled community, I don't have the mom perspective. I don't have the dad perspective, those sorts of things. So I think it's really, really important that we ask our members what their needs are and then steer to make sure that those needs are met. One of the big ways to be able to do that is to keep in conversations with all of those individuals. But we also have to be realistic, right? We have to make sure that everything is efficient, because unlike ABA staff where it's their job to do these things, the YLD leadership is we are volunteers. We have our day jobs and all of that. So we have to be as efficient as possible. And I think the best way to do that and to make sure that all of the needs of our members are met is through utilizing that technology. So what we can do, for example, is incorporating automation with personalized messages to enhance delegate recruitment so that the automation will increase efficiency, but also provide outreach efforts and that institutional knowledge. So that will require some close collaboration, like I said, with the ABA staff to discuss the tech possibilities that are available. But I think one of the things that is possibly the easiest with the technology that I know already exists is keeping an updated database that can be saved, accessed for following years, where we can outline when affiliates bar years turnover, for example, because it would be most easiest, I think, to outreach to our affiliates when they're already turning over and changing their contact information on their websites, on their survey, social media accounts, those sorts of things. So if we know, for example, New Mexico turns over in January, South Dakota turns over in July, or what have you, we can hit those leaders exactly where it is, and then they can trickle down, waterfall, make sure that we get all of the needs from all of the members across the nation and internationally.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. Mr. Rivera, same question. The YLD has brought forward a number of policies over the last few years related to things like anti-discrimination, paid parental leave, student debt matters, and more. Do you believe that there is an area that the YLD has not brought policy in where you would like to steer the division or the assembly if you're elected?
Thank you, Speaker Jennison. So first, I'd like to echo what Ms. Inman said about, it is important to keep your finger on the pulse of what the division wants. But secondly, an area that is important to me, and I think that the YLD could definitely be a breath of fresh air within the House of Delegates and bringing it, is health, and specifically mental health and wellness. It's an important aspect to everyone's practice. It's something that the YLD has taken an even bigger stance on, even implementing a director of health and wellness and a health and wellness team under Chair Brown this year. Personally, I serve on the Mental Health and Wellness Committee of the Florida Bar, actually vice chair of that this year. And I'd like to share just a short little story. Recently, there was a law firm, I believe it was Oric, that implemented a policy for their attorneys to unplug for a week. And they were going to, I believe, give billable hour credit throughout the whole week. And they had a policy in place for coverage for anything that might be going on that week. I shared that policy on LinkedIn saying, I'd love to see more law firms do this. And I received a text message from one of my law partners who is 20 years older than me. And he said, I'm sending you this text because LinkedIn doesn't have a thumbs down button. In our profession, you can't unplug. So, I think that there is the old guard that thinks that the practice of law has to be one way. And one of those things that they think is you can't unplug and you can't have any personal time, that you have to be on the clock at all times. That's not healthy. I had an autoimmune disease. I worked myself into a liver transplant, and that's not a way that anyone should feel that they have to work. And so I think the Young Lawyers Division should bring policy that is in the mental health or just health, physical health and wellness area to the House of Delegates.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. We will go to you for the next question. A candidate for chair of the House of Delegates recently described the implementation of resolutions after they pass the House as a concern primarily for the sponsoring entity. In other words, if the YLD brings a policy to the House of Delegates and it's adopted, it is the YLD's charge to implement it further if we want to be partnering with government affairs or other steps. How would you work to make sure that the YLD has effective policymaking, not only in the drafting and advocacy in the House, but after matters are adopted by the House?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the pillars that my platform stands on is transparency. And one of the things that supports that is telling your stakeholders what are you doing with a resolution. That holds for the Assembly, that holds for the House of Delegates. And beginning with that end in mind, that you're going to have to communicate back to your constituents, how is this resolution that they voted on, that they worked on and toiled on, how is this being implemented, makes you think from the beginning, how are we going to implement it? And I think that that's something that, it's a consideration that you need to have in mind when you're bringing policy, whether it's to the Assembly, whether it's to the House of Delegates. And so, before we step into the well and before we start advocating for a certain policy, we need to understand what does that look like once that policy is passed. And so, once you have that in mind, you can start to decide, okay, so we're gonna have to work with the Government Affairs Office to lobby Congress to pass this policy. Or we're gonna have to work with the Judicial Division to communicate down to its member judges that would like a policy for giving young lawyers more opportunities to advocate on behalf of their clients, and really start to think, who are our external stakeholders that we need to work with as we actually work on putting the policy together and what we're asking people to do. And then obviously, as part of my transparency platform, it would be communicating back to the division as a whole, or the proponents of a resolution, exactly what are we doing? When we say in many of our resolutions that we want to urge someone to do something, how are we urging that? What is the lever that we're leaning on to try to get state, local, tribal governments to pass law or ban certain things? And so that it's just something that you need to think about at the outset, and it differs for every policy and who we're urging to do something. Anyway, that's so like I said, it's just thinking about it from the outset. How are you going to implement this policy, and who are you going to ask to help you in doing that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Inman, same question. The candidate for chair of the House recently said that the sponsoring entity of a resolution is really the entity that's also responsible for implementation of a resolution after it's adopted by the House. How would you work to make sure that the YLD has effective policymaking, not only in the drafting and advocacy in the House, but after a matter is adopted by the House as well?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with Mr. Rivera. We both really have transparency on our platform. I flavor it, calling it demystifying the process, but it's transparency, right? So we have to start from the beginning. When resolutions are being proposed, when they are being submitted as a possible resolution idea, when they are back at the drafting process, we have to look at, like Mr. Rivera said, what we are asking and who we are asking to do it. And that all runs into implementation. When we submit a resolution, for those of you who are not as familiar with the behind the scenes process, when you draft and submit a resolution, you have a information, it's not a cover sheet because it comes at the end, but it talks about sponsoring entities, if there's any similar past proposals or resolutions that were either adopted or not, all of those sorts of things. And it includes how things are going to be implemented, how this resolution is going to be made to happen once it's adopted. And I know that when I have presented my resolutions, I've drafted two and successfully presented those resolutions. They were pretty simple things. The implementation aspect was not super involved, but we need to make sure when people are drafting these resolutions that they understand the implementation process, right? Not only the drafting process, but what happens afterward. We want to make sure that these don't get fallen behind. So we can educate our members and our drafters on what that actually looks like going forward after adoption. And it's going to depend. Each resolution is going to be a little bit different depending on who's being urged to do something. For the resolutions that I did, it was mostly bylaw change amendments, right? So the implementation was fixing the paperwork. It's not that time or financially exhaustive, right? But other things like urging government entities to do things. Who is going to be those contact people? We have to know. We have to be able to have, whether it's a flow chart, a checklist, something so that we make sure that these resolutions don't fall on the wayside afterward. And really, when we're drafting and proposing, making sure that that checklist and that flow chart is known about and aware of. So even when we get to the drafting part, or before when we get to the drafting part rather, who we are urging and in what way reflects that checklist so that we can actually make sure things happen down the line. Because when we have our pulses on the needs of our people, it doesn't matter if they never come to fruition and they fizzle out by the end.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. I have no questions from the audience in the chat. If anybody has any, please let me know. We are just a few minutes over, and so I'll ask my last question unless anybody has any others. and ask that the candidates keep brevity in mind. Membership is an association-wide concern. Ms. Inman, we'll turn to you first. What do you believe the role of clerk and speaker is as it relates to membership retention?
Absolutely. And I promised in my opening that I would not be too repetitive. So I'm actually going to keep this brief and point everyone to my candidate statement on the YLD election webpage, as well as the first candidate forum. In my introduction, and part of my question answering from that first forum was part of that promoting participation and making sure that we speak about policy making as a member benefit. As a couple of the other candidates for the other positions noted, we've had lots of surveys. We've had all sorts of things looking at what our members or prospective members value as being in the ABA. And what our surveys say is that not necessarily do our members want to or have the bandwidth to put in the energy to make the policy making themselves. A lot do, not everybody. Probably the majority do not, right? Our mailbox members don't have those capacities. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to affiliate with an organization that does this policy making, okay? It doesn't mean that they don't want to say like, oh yeah, I'm an ABA member, they did X, Y, Z, that's stinking awesome. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be a delegate and put their vote, raise their hand, have their voice heard on those assembly floors and those resolutions, even if they're not drafting them and putting them forth on their own. So member benefit, policy making, making sure butts are in seats, either virtually or in person. That is what I think the clerk and speaker's role is.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. Mr. Rivera, same question. Membership is an association-wide concern. What do you believe the role of clerk and speaker is as it relates to membership retention?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As clerk, as Ms. Inman said, one of the duties of the clerk is education. Yeah, I think it's very important to educate members as to the way that they can participate in assembly and the way that they can participate in policy making and bringing forth resolutions that are important to them. If someone is involved in something that is important to them, then they're likely to stick around to continue that work. Moving on, as speaker, one of my platforms is inclusion. And one of the things that I'm proposing under that platform, and you can read more on my website at richforclerk.com, is to begin the debate process well in advance of assembly, creating an online forum for our members, even those anchor members that don't plan to come to assembly and that can't, frankly, come to assembly because of the various financial and professional and familial barriers that there could be for that, to participate and have their thoughts on different policies and resolutions heard at the actual assembly by being able to participate in advance through an online forum. Again, if someone's included and is participating, then they're more likely to stick around. Also, as speaker, I talked briefly during the first candidates forum about using the power that the YLD has and its large membership that frankly other SDFs want to get a piece of and have co-sponsorships and have support of their resolutions, and using that to essentially log roll and horse trade for support of our resolutions and policies. Well, I'd also like to be able to lean on those other SDFs to put in place programs like the antitrust section and section of litigation, the business law section, that actually require young lawyers to be in a leadership position in all of their constituent committees. And so I'd like to be able to advocate for other SDFs to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. That concludes our questions. So we'll now give the clerk candidates an opportunity to give concluding remarks. Mr. Rivera, you may speak up for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even though we had more time during this candidates forum, it always seems to go by so quickly, and you never get to say all the things that you want to say. As I recently said, my candidate website is rich4clerk.com. You can see it in my Zoom name there. Please do visit. You have an opportunity to connect with me there and read more about the details of each of my platforms and how I intend to promote and foster transparency, relevance, and inclusivity in my role as clerk and speaker if I am elected. Also, I want to hear from you. Relevancy is one of my platforms, and that means that we want to make Assembly relevant to the members of the Young Lawyers Division. And as Ms. Inman said earlier, the only way to really do that is to hear from the members of the Young Lawyers Division about what's important to them, because I'm a litigation attorney in a private practice law firm, and I as well don't know what a government attorney might need to help them in their practice and their lives. So please do reach out to me. I want to hear about what policies are important to you and what you, and regardless if it's a policy that is important to you that you want to see passed, it may be something that you think that is ripe for debate and something that the Young Lawyers Division should take a position on. So again, just thank you for coming to the Candidates Forum, and I look forward to speaking with more of you as we move through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Inman, you may speak for up to 3 minutes in conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I gotta say, I was prepared for the attribute question that the other two campaigns was receiving. So I'm gonna answer it. The attribute question, I think passion, because without passion, you'll fizzle out. And passion is the energy that runs the desire to pursue the goals that you have. And I'm definitely passionate. I'm passionate about the making of policies that better our personal lives, our professional practices, and the community we serve. And that passion is what fuels me. I think that most can agree I'm like a little Energizer bunny. And with that passion, I have had ample experience with both the resolution and delegate processes and Robert's Rules of Order, which is the procedural rules for assembly. Including the last mid-year assembly in February, I have voted as either a scholar or a New Mexico delegate at 6 of the last 7 assemblies. In that time, I have spoken as primary con against 2 resolutions, have made motions to amend from the floor. I have proposed, drafted, and presented and passed 2 original resolutions, one unanimously and one unanimously on the debate calendar and one via the consent calendar. And I've moved and presented as primary proponent another resolution. I have served nearly 2 years on the resolutions team, assisted with delegate check-ins at in-person meetings, and helped others propose and revise their resolutions. I've supported efforts to have one of my own resolutions presented to the House of Delegates. Last year, I assisted last year's Speaker Jamie Davis behind the scenes and actually earned Star of the Quarter for fall 2019 for my work with her, and supported her for both in-person assembly mid-year 2020 and the virtual assembly last annual meeting in August. As the New Mexico Young Lawyers Division Chair currently, I am also familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, running our board meetings with that system. And I have been confirmed to start a term as the New Mexico Young Lawyer Delegate to the House of Delegates next bar year. But I know I'm not, the Energizer bunny that I am is not what everyone is. So I'm also passionate about engagement and making sure that everyone has the opportunity and support to be involved in the process to the extent that their energy and their bandwidth allows. While supporting our fellow division members should be everyone's goal, the clerk and the speaker are in the unique positions to make internal and behind the scenes improvements to ensure that support is actualized. We need to analyze what we're doing, how it's helping, and where more work can be done. And by working in conjunction with the entire leadership team, we can emphasize member benefit policymaking. I respectfully request that you vote for me come August. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. Again, thank you to Mr. Rivera as well. Thank you to both these candidates for stepping up and putting their name into consideration. We stay tuned for more information over coming weeks and months about the elections process, where you can learn some more information about how to vote for your preferred candidate for each of these three contests. Thank you all for attending today, and stay tuned.